Okay, we should just hear B'soros Tovos in all ways. We're going to begin with chapter 10, verse 9. Chapter 10, verse 9. We're going through we're going through the different generations at this point, and actually we'll begin with verse 8. V'chush yaladas Nimrod. Chush gave birth to Nimrod, who echel lios gibor ba'aretz. And Nimrod began to be a strong individual in the land. Verse 9, excuse me for 1 second, someone keeps on calling me. Okay, whatever. Verse 9, Hu haya gibor tzai lifnei Hashem. He was a warrior before God. Ken Yamar, so much so that there's a phrase which goes, Kinimrod, Gibor Tzai Lifnei Hashem. To be like Nimrod, a warrior before God. Now, the obvious question to ask over here is, what in the world does it mean to be a warrior before God? What do those words even mean? So let's see the Ramban on Pasuk Tes, Hu haya Gibor Tzai Lifnei Hashem. He starts off by citing Rashi. Sod daton shel brios befiv, umaton limrod b'makom. So he was a hunter. I translated Gibor as a warrior. Gibor means strong, but Sayid is to hunt. He would entrap people with his words against God. He would make people believe that there wasn't a God in the world. Al Ken Yomar, Al Kol Adam Marshia, or at least a monotheistic God, Al Kol Adam Marshia, Ba'azus Panim, V'yodea Ribono, Muskavin Limrodbo, Yeomer Zek and Nimrod. So he became such a unique person in this regard that if you ever meet a person who has total audacity towards God and tries to rebel against God in a very out there kind of way, we say, wow, this is like a real Nimrod type. That's how Rashi understands what it means to be a warrior of hunting before God. That's what Rashi says. That's what the Medrash says. The Ibn Ezra says the opposite. The Ibn Ezra says what I think many of us would have assumed. The Ibn Ezra says he was really good at trapping animals. He was really good at hunting animals. So that's what it means to be a Gibor Tzayid. What does it mean before God? Perish Lifnei Hashem, Sheyabona Mizbachos, Umalas Achayos La'olah Lifnei Hashem. He would build altars, and he would trap animals, and he would bring animals as offerings to God on the altars. So it's fascinating. So whereas Rashi understands that Nimrod was really, really out there, that's how Rashi understands in very, very, very much against God. Ibn Ezra says, what do you mean? He hunted animals and he brought them as korbanos to Hashem. The Ramban says, Vein Dvar Niran. I don't think he's correct. Vinehu Matzdik Rasha. Krabusenu Yadu Risho B'Kabbalah. Ramban says, how can you say that about Nimrod? That the oral Torah is full of terrible things said about Nimrod, and you're painting him as some big tzaddik? What are you talking about? The Ramban says, I think the pshat is, he began to use his force on people. He was the first one to really be a real monarch, to force people, to compel people to do what he wanted. Until the times of Nimrod, there weren't wars, and there wouldn't be a person who took over an area. The Gavar Tchila Bavel at Shemalach Aleim. He overpowered the people of the Bavel area until he ruled over them. The Acharkach Yatzal Ashur. Then he moved down to Ashur. Vaser Chetzono Ve'igdil, and he kept on building up his base of power. Uvanasham Arim Betzuros Besakvo Gvuraso, and he built up powerful cities there. So interesting three pshatim. So Rashi understands that his warrior and hunting was that he talked against God. The Ibn Ezra understands he was really good at hunting animals. He would bring them as offerings to God. And the Ramban says he was a very powerful ruler, and he seems to have been some type of dictator. And presumably the idea of Livnei Hashem is he didn't humble himself before God, and he didn't have moral qualms or concerns. That seems to be the pshat according to the Ramban. Okay, let's jump ahead to chapter 11, verse 4. Chapter 11, verse 4. Actually, let's start with verse 3. So the we said in verse 1 that everyone spoke the same language. And there was this valley, and a number of people lived there. And now in verse 3, it says, Vayomru isha re'ehu. And they said one to the other, Hava nilbana levinim. Let's build bricks. V'nisrafa l'srefa, and we'll use fire. Vati lehem alveina la'oven v'achimar yalehem chomer. They built up in different ways. Verse 4, Vayomru hava nibna lanu ir. They said, let's build a city, umigdol v'rosho v'shamayim, and a tower with its top going up to the skies, the heavens. V'nasa lanu shem, and we'll make a name for ourselves. Pen nafutz al pnei chol haaretz, lest we get spread out over the entire land. And God is concerned about this, and this disturbs God. So you really kind of have to ask yourself, like, what's going on here? What are they trying to do? What is their goal? What does God care if they build a tall tower? There's a lot of different ideas said in the Mefarshim. I just want to share with you the Sforno. Sforno on Pasuk Dalet. Vayomru havan ibn lanu ir. Zos hoisa ata sare hador lahamlich es nimrod akol hamin ha'anoshi. It fits in an interesting way with what we saw with the Ramban, that the idea was Nimrod was going to be the most powerful ruler in humanity. This was the plan. Umigdov Roshov Hashemayim v'nasa lanu shem. We'll have this great tower and we'll make a name for ourselves. Says the Sforno, Nasa shem avodah zara shetia v'migdal. There'll be an association with idol worship with this tower. V'yetze b'chol ha'aminu ha'anoshi shem gova makoma. Everyone, all people of this world will know about this one spot with this remarkably tall tower. The Godel Ira and the greatness of the city. Ba'ofen shetechashev Elokehu Elokim Eitzel Elohehu Elohim Eitzel Kol Bnei Adam Ve'eleh Yidrshu Kulam. This city and this tower will be known by all, and people will associate this tower with the greatest force in the world. And people will believe that the greatest force in the entire, not just among mankind, the greatest force, period, emanates from our city. That's how people will see it. V'akavana baza haisa, the intent of this was, sham molech al osa'ir yimloch al kol aminu anoshi b'yosham drishas kulam. That whoever was the ruler of that city would be seen as the center of humanity, and whoever ruled that city would rule the entire world, would rule all the human race. So that's an interesting picture that the Sforno is painting. Many understand this as being some fight against God, which is always very difficult to understand what that means. Like, we're going to build a really tall tower, and then what are you going to do? The Sforno is an interesting shot. The Sforno is saying they're just trying to make people really impressed. But the idea of we'll make a name for ourselves is that where this is going to go is we'll convince people to believe that it's all about us, and that there's no God, and it's just we run the world, and we will be the source of all power. And it's an interesting shot to think about. Then verse 5, Vayered Hashem lir'os es ha'ir ves hamigdal. God went down to see the city and the tower, asher banu b'nei Adam, that the people built. What does this mean, that God went down to see it? And then, of course, the famous thing, God says this is going to be bad, and he makes it that he spreads them out and they speak different languages. But the language of God going down to see, I mean, what does that mean? We normally say whenever God judges us that God went down. What does that mean? So very interesting Rashi, very famous Rashi over here. Rashi Pasuk Hey, Vayered Hashem liros l'chutz rach lekach. This is not really necessary to say. It's a lesson to judges that we shouldn't conclude that a person is wicked, that a person is guilty, until we really roll up our sleeves and get down into the matter. So it's really strange to say that God went down. It's just to teach a point that God only rendered judgment once he was on the ground, so to say. Of course, it's not only true for judges, it's true for all of us. We're all judges, whether officially or not. We're all rendering judgment. But to be quick, to not so quick to judge, and to make sure we're understanding all the angles. But the Sfornos has a really interesting pshat. If you go to the Sforno, Pasuk Hey, V'yered Hashem liros, Nei Lashona Yerida liros Yeomer Alakel Yisparach Kishe'ena Inyan Oz Roy Laonesh Al Mubnei HaKilkol Hanimshach Elav Besofa Inyan. Really interesting pshat. The Sforno says that the meaning of God going down is when God is going to act, not because whatever is being done now is so fundamentally horrible, but where it will lead. So in other words, what's the sin in building a really tall tower? Nothing. But God understood where this was going. According to the Sforno, it was going to be that really to move people away from the idea of monotheism, to build a tremendous base of power in the world, and that wasn't going to be good. It wasn't going to be good for mankind. So God stops them. That's the Sforno's pshat. Just an interesting thing to think about. So we discussed this morning 3 pshatim and what it means that Nimrod was a keyboard Tzayef Nei Hashem. It's interesting to think about. At least 2 of the pshatim fit very interestingly with this discussion. If you say that Nimrod was in the center of the action with the Tower of Babel, which is a common approach in the commentaries, and we saw the Sforno's perspective on what was going on with the Tower of Babel, and we saw Rashi and the Sforno regarding what it means that God went down.